All right, so hello friends. Today we'll be looking at the game Nepo, who's this guy in the picture, and black is Ding Liren, who is the guy on the right. Yen Nepomniachtchi is white, Ding Liren is black, and this game was played in Candidates Tournament 2020, and I believe this is round number 6. So white is Jan Nepomniachtchi, black is Ding Liren. Let's start looking at the game. This was the Spanish opening, which is also known as Royal Lopez opening. So Mr. Breeze pass through the obvious moves in the opening. Uh, Black is knight f6, castles, b7, and d3. So d3 is sort of a sideline here. As many of you might be knowing, rook e1 is the main line. The reason for white playing rook e1 is that he wants to ultimately put his pawn to the d4 squares. He wants to build this pawn chain. So that's why rook e1 is another way to protect the e4 pawn. However, Yan had a different strategy, so he played d3. With this move order where white plays d3, obviously the intention is to protect the e4 pawn, but ultimately white wants to keep flexibility when it comes to when it comes to his opening plans. In one plan, he can still try to go for c3 and then d4, albeit he'll be losing a move here. And in other cases, he wants to keep the flexibility of developing his knight to the c3 square. So this is the idea behind white's playing the opening. It's mostly a matter of taste, it's your personal preferences on what kind of a position you want to play. Nepomniachtchi has played rook e1 also in the past, but I guess he had prepared the line d3 against Ding Liren. So d3 is a standard move, good move. Just a different way of playing this opening. So obviously now, since e4 is protected, white is threatening to take the pawn on e5 after taking the knight on c6. Right? So black has to answer for that. There's b5, bishop b3, and now d6. Black is protecting the pawn on e5 with the pawn on d6, and now black's idea is to play knight f5 and to attack the white's light squared bishop. So exchanging the knight for the light squared bishop is a strategical um, like a strategical triumph for black. So obviously, if white allows this exchange, then he weakens his position a little bit. So that's why white creates this square a2 square for his bishop. Black castles and white plays knight c3. So as I said earlier, white wants to put his knight on c3. That's why he played the move d3. He does not want to go c3 and d4. Now this position is a very is a very frequently played position in Grandmaster games. There have been previous games played in this position. One game, so in the game, Ding played knight a5, but there was another game that was played before this game. So black had played bishop g4, and the game proceeded by white playing bishop e3. So obviously, after black has played bishop g4, he's pinning the white knight, and black is planning to play knight to d4 to put pressure on white's knight on f3, and to to counter that threat, white plays bishop e3. Now knight d4, white takes with the bishop take. Knight d5, black takes, White takes with the bishop, rook c8. Now, the reason for rook c8 is sort of to trick white into capturing the e6 pawn. So if white goes after the e6 pawn with bishop b7, then black plays rook b8, and if white takes the pawn on a6, then black can play rook b6 and trap white's bishop. That is just a trick that white has to look out for. But if white does not fall for that trick, then black wants to play a move like c6 and eventually start pushing pawns on the queen side. And white played bishop c6 here. And I believe after, I think bishop c6 is a very good move. The reason being that after bishop c6, black's position on the queen side gets really cramped. I mean, he's not able to free his queen side or his queen by moving the c pawn. So putting the bishop on c6 cramps black's queen side, right? So I mean, especially these three pieces, they really become cramped. And I think bishop c6 is a very good strategical move. Slowly trying to cramp black and remove any space in his position. And so after a long battle, white ultimately won this game. So this game was played between Vasily Lagrave and Levon Aronian. So the variation we are currently looking at right now, black was Levon Aronian, and white was Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, both grandmasters from France and Armenia, respectively. And white went on to win this game. White eventually got very good play on the queen side, and he was also able to utilize his central pawn majority. So anyway, let's go back to our original game between Jan Nepomniachtchi and Ding Liren. So Ding did not play bishop g4 in the game. He went with the other idea of playing knight a5. And the reason for knight a5 is that black wants to start pushing this pawn either to c5 or to c6. And for that reason, he's moving the knight out of the c pawn space. And also in the meantime, getting an extra move by attacking white's bishop. So white plays bishop a2, and black now plays bishop e6. So for black, like black is in many variations under pressure because of the bishop, because of white's light squared bishop. There is a lot of pressure that gets put by this e2 bishop. And for that reason, black plays bishop e6 before pushing his pawn to c5. So yeah, so let's see game bishop e6. And I think Jan Nepomniachtchi finds a very nice idea here. See, black wants to push his pawn, and this is white's window to try to stop that, or maybe try to prepare against that if black plays that. He plays b4. And what b4 does is that it poses a question to this knight, wherever it wants to go. Does it want to go to c6, or does it want to go to b7? If the knight goes to b7, then this knight is, kind of places itself on a very bad square, because from b7 it can only control, it can go to either d8, d6, c5, and a5. And all of these four squares are really not accessible to this knight. So this knight really becomes very badly placed, and there are some very classical, very well played classical games like Kasparov versus Shirov, or Karpov versus Jan Timman. So those classical games have really showed on how a knight placed on b7 or g7 can be exploited by white. So I'm sure Ding must be aware of these kinds of classical games, and so he does not put his knight on b7. So he goes first bishop into a2, take, and goes knight c6. And now a very different kind of pawn structure has arisen. So um, if you closely look at the pawn structure and also the remaining pieces, what you'll see is that uh, the light squares in the position are really weak. And if white can place his knight on d5 without it getting exchanged, then he will have like a very long-term positional advantage and also a very good strategical advantage. So it would really very good for white if he could place his knight on d5, since black has already exchanged his own light square bishops. So with that in mind, white plays bishop g5. The idea being I want to first capture this knight and then put the knight on d5. Okay, so black doesn't have a lot to do here except develop his pieces. White takes, knight d5. Now I'm trying to capture the bishop by playing knight into f6. He plays a5. So white, sorry, black doesn't really um, isn't bothered by knight into f6 check, and I think and uh, and I believe Jan Nepomniachtchi also looked at this variation. So if he takes knight f6, g into f6, true, this pawn structure is damaged, but the question now really becomes: can white take advantage of this bad pawn structure on in black's kingside? So it's totally true and valid that these pawns are really bad. But a second level question here is white in a position to take advantage of these double pawns? Because if white is not, and let's say black gets some chance or an extra move here, he can quickly dissolve these double pawns by playing by playing f5. And let's say they get another chance to continue the game here, then they can take, and black can start opening more files in front of the white king, right? So actually doubling the f pawns can give black some counter chances against the white king. And for that reason, I think both Ding Liren and his opponent Jan Nepomniachtchi, um, thought that this is not a very good, this is not a bad situation for black if white takes on f6. And so Ding just continues his play on the queen side. And I also agree with this assessment. True. I myself would have considered taking on the bishop on f6 and fracturing black's pawn structure on the king side. But then I'm giving my fantastically placed knight on d5, and black's bishop on f6 is a bad bishop. So perhaps it's a good argument not to exchange that knight for the bishop on f6. So white does not take on f6, but black is threatening to take on b4 and putting the pressure on the a file. So white moves his rook to b2. White takes, and now he plays bishop d8. So okay, and white continues his play on the queen side. Black plays knight g4, and white takes, and plays queen to c2. So here, the play, the succeeding play really becomes about the d5 square and the queen side, right? So white already has a few major pieces, like the rook and the queen, and he also has advanced his pawns on the queen side. So there are the two major factors after this position is the first is the knight on d5. The play is gonna revolve around that. White's knight on d5. And the second factor that is going to determine the course of the play is the queen side. Um, so let's see how both players try to work around these two factors. Just get the notes here. Uh, round two major. All right. So for white to stabilize his knight on d5, if white can exchange this his c pawn for black c pawn, then his knight on d5 will really get solidified. Because the only way black can kick the knight from d5 is by playing c6. And so both white and black are working, not working, but their moves are revolved around these aspects. So black is trying to gain the control of the d5 square with his c pawn, while white is trying to exchange the c pawn so that his knight can get a permanent square on the d5 square. Okay, black plays rook e8. Now I guess one thing I have to mention here is that if black plays c6, true, he kicks out white's knight immediately. So white has to play something like knight f4. And let's say if he plays rook e8 now, then white can take c into b5, c into b5, and his knight comes back to d5. And now the knight is really sealed on the d5 square. It's fantastically placed. And the knight on d5 is not going anywhere. So this would be a very major strategical accomplishment for white, and something which black definitely wants to avoid. So for that reason, black or Ding Liren here, he is not playing c6 immediately. He's keeping c6 as an option, just in case he needs to kick that knight. But he does not want to give a statical advantage or a permanent, um, or he does not want to give the d5 square permanent. He just wants to keep the option to kick the knight whenever he wants to. For that reason, black just continues with his development, and like just bring his rook to a open file. G3, so I guess G3 is a good move. White has a back rank, but it's generally a good advice to clear your back rank if you have the time to do so. And white definitely has the time here, so he clears his back rank. B into c4, queen into c4. Then black plays c6 and f4. And now let's take a look at what black played. Black plays bishop g5. So here, as I said before, the play is revolved around the d5 square and the queen side. So let's say if black had played a move like bishop f6 or bishop b6, let's say it is bishop f6, protecting the d4 square, then white will play b5. And the idea behind b5 is to exchange these two pawns, especially the c6 pawn, which is controlling the d5 square. So once I get the c6 pawn exchanged, again, my knight will get the d5 square. And yeah, again, as I said, this would be a major accomplishment for black. It takes on b5, then I take rook into b5. And ultimately now my knight is coming to d5. So let's say if there's something like bishop e5, then my knight comes to d5. Now the knight is fantastically placed. And now I can start to play, like white can start to play on the queen side, putting his rook to b7, maybe start to push his pawns on the king side with f4, f5. So strategically speaking, this would be a very, very good position for white. And for that reason, black does not want white to get this chance to to place his knight on d5. He's not allowing black to come b5. Anyway, so that's why black plays bishop g5. So if white plays b5 now, then he really doesn't get time to put his knight to d5, right? So I'll take c into b5, rook into b5, and I will just take the knight. And here black also has like a perpetual, right? So to take, the knight is not coming to g5 anymore. So even though the d5 square is weak, it's more important to put a knight there. If the knight is exchanged, then getting the d5 square isn't as effective. And actually in this variation, black just has a perpetual here, right? And this will be a draw because it's draw by repetition. So that's why he plays bishop g5. And white does not want to exchange the knight, so he plays knight to e2. Not true that the d4 pawn is looking very weak, but for black it was important to not to give the d5 square. So this game just shows us the thinking process or the thought process that grandmasters have, or the top chess players in the world have. They place a lot of emphasis on strategical thinking and maintaining the activity of their pieces. So in the preceding play, like what we have seen in the preceding play is that both white and black, they are giving a lot of importance to the positional aspects, to the strategical aspects of the position, rather than the material ones. So yeah, so after knight e2, the d4 pawn becomes weak, but I think black is still fine here because his other pieces are active here. And now he really gets a chance to open up his position with d5. Take. White plays queen b3. So a very small tactic. If white takes the pawn on d4, then black has bishop f6, and white will either lose his queen or rook. You cannot take the d4 pawn immediately. He plays queen b3. Albeit he might take it with his knight after some time. Anyway, so black plays h5 here. So for black, it is important to create some play. White already has a strong asset on the queen side. He can just keep on pushing his pawn, and so which is a great plan for white. And so black needs a similar or an equally weighted plan which would counter white's efforts on the queen side. For that reason, black is playing h5 so that he can start creating threats on the king side and potentially create some mating threats on the king side. There is another question to answer here. White still cannot take the knight on the pawn on d4, because if he takes it with his knight, black can play bishop f6, and now the knight is against queen. Right? If the knight moves, then I take the bishop takes white's rook on b2, and if white protects his knight with queen c3, then his queen will just get kicked out, and now the knight is lost. So the pawn on d4 is taboo. White cannot take it immediately, but white has another plan. So pushes his pawn. Black plays h4. White plays b6. As I said, white had a very standard plan of pushing his b pawn. There isn't much ambiguity as to what white should be doing here. Black plays h3 and king h1. So after playing, with the h3 pawn, black has threats like he can play his queen to f5 and f3, and then there is a mate on g2. And so white wants to just prepare for that and potentially prevent those threats. So king h1. And now let's say if black had played queen f5, then I would go knight g1 and protect the f3 square. And also I'm attacking the h3 pawn. So that's what white's idea is. Black in the game played rook e b8. White reinforced the protection of the b pawn by playing rook to b1, bishop d8. He attacks the b6 pawn, queen b5. So threatening a simple or proposing a simple queen exchange. Black plays queen g4. I have to mention here that if black takes queen into b5, and if black exchanges the queens, then this trade would be really unfavorable for black. Like exchanging pieces are also a form of strategical thinking. See, for white, his after exchanging the queens, white's position is still good. Like meaning that all the triumphs he had in his position, they are still intact. He has not lost any advantage or any asset that he had gotten in the middle game after exchanging the queens. But for black, it really becomes harder to create threats against white's king. See, as I said earlier, for white, the plan is on the queen side, pushing his b pawn. For black, the plan is on the king side, like giving mating threats to the white king. But without the queen, black cannot execute credible threats. He cannot give powerful threats against the white king. Once the queens are exchanged, then mating threats are just not possible. And that's why the queen exchange will favor white more than black. So for that reason, white proposes this queen exchange. Like he's saying, let's trade queens, and for that very same reason, black has to say no and walk away. So black plays queen g4, and now he's immediately threatening a checkmate. Right, he's threatening a check and then a mate on the g2 square. White takes queen into d5. So it's protecting the f3 square by taking the pawn. And black plays rook a5. So rook a5, very interesting move. It looks like is black giving a rook for free, but if white takes the rook on a5, then he gets checkmated in two, right? And checkmate. So what really black is doing is that he's giving a decoy, like he's giving us a sacrifice and try to tempt white from giving up the control of the f3 square. So the f3 square is really important. White has to keep control of it. Plays queen c6, so it's still controlling f3. And now black plays rook c5. So again, if he takes, then I'll play queen f3 check and checkmate white. White now finally he gives a check on e8 to the black king. Black plays king h7. Now again, I'm still threatening queen to f3 check, and white plays knight g1. So one thing to mention here is that could white have traded the queens? Like as I mentioned earlier that queen exchange or queen trade suits white. So can't white do that? And I think that is a very valid question. But now we have to justify our decision through some brute force or or through good calculations. So here, trading the queens changes the pawn structure, right? So take, and now the pawn structure has changed a little bit. Especially black has gotten this pass pawn, which he can now use to create threats, right? So now he can push his pawn, which he will. And now let's see, plays d3, and okay, white goes knight f4, and I guess if it does that, then I think black can take rook into b6, and if white tries to take the pawn, like the piece on b6, then black can straight deliver a checkmate. As I said earlier, like this white's back rank has become weak because black had pushed his pawn earlier in the middle game to the h3 square. And because of this pawn, the white king has become really weak. You know, this back rank, this has really become weak due to the h pawn. And that's one thing that white has to take into account. So he has to justify his decisions with some brute force calculation. And even though white gets to trade his queens in this variation, it gives black an asset. He gives black a chance to create counterplay due to by like of due to his d pawn. Black gets a lot of counterplay, and white loses um, a chunk of his advantage, which he had created before. So exchanging queens is desirable for white, but white has to be cognizant that he is exchanging the queens in the right way. The queens are getting exchanged in the right way, and white is not giving any advantage. He's not giving up any of his advantage he built earlier while doing that. So for that reason, white goes knight g1, protecting the f3 square with his knight. Okay, and now black takes rook into b6. White takes queen into g8. So I guess one question here is, could white have taken rook into b6, bishop into b6, rook into b6? I think that was probably possible, but then black, I think black has some chances of counterplay after rook c1, and then true white can now exchange the queens. But maybe black can create some counterplay. d6, rook d1. And I think this position is really complicated. For one reason is that white's king side is really paralyzed due to this rook, right? And so maybe white wins here, but it's not clear. Like white is a piece up, but his king side is paralyzed. So this is not a very clear uh, uh, clear evaluation here. Maybe black has a draw here. I think there is a strong possibility that black can get a draw here. Anyway, so black takes the white pawn on b6, and white takes the bishop on d8. And now takes is rook c1, trying to give this check, right? So black has pinned the white knight, and so he can give this checkmate, because if white takes the queen, then his king is gone. He will lose his king, right? So the king is under check. So rook c1, white is black is threatening checkmate on f3, but now white gets to exchange the queens, take. Black plays rook d1, and white plays f3. And here, Ding Liren resigned. And I think I can understand the motivation for why he resigned. The reason that I think is that if black takes rook into d3, then it allows white to escape from the pin on the back line. So you can take knight into h3, and if it takes rook f3, then knight g5 check. The fork, right? So I'm attacking the king and the rook. And so if he gives check again, then my king comes out, and let's say play something like king g6. I can play knight f2, and eventually white will drive out black's pieces. And once black's pieces are out, like especially his rook, then white is a piece up, which is, as we know, more than sufficient for a grandmaster like Nepo to win the game. So I think a very strategical game by Nepomniachtchi. It's very hard to pinpoint where black went wrong, and that's because I think white played a very good strategical game. He just kept on building his position advantages one by one. Eventually, which led to black crumbling under the pressure of the B pawn. So the B pawn, I think it just created too much pressure for black to bear, and I think it was a great game by Nepo. So I hope you guys learned something from this game. I guess some of the learnings in this game are um, how how grandmasters think. Like I think the battle in the middle game around the d5 square was really interesting, and then how white just capitalized on his b pawn. That was also very instructive. All right, so I will post the analysis to this game in the link below. And subscribe if you like this video, and keep learning. Thank you.